Station, Manx Radio.
You are listening to the Mannin line off the back of Present Politics. My guests all staying in the studio, who I'm glad to say, to answer your questions and talk about various topics, various subjects. And that's Colin Leather, Chairman of Castletown Commissioners, Jane Poole-Wilson, MLC, and Dr. Alex Allinson of Ramsey, the MHK up there. We need to have your contributions. Obviously, this programme thrives on your contributions, but what you say should be legal, honest, decent and truthful. 661368, or as I probably would say, it's 66 13 68. 166 177 is the text, and the email is studio@manxradio.com. Contributions have been coming in from you all the time. Incidentally, do you know how much it takes to mend a Manx pothole? Because you get some fascinating bits of information. £45, apparently. And 1,876 potholes were filled in the last 18 months. This in answer to a Keys question. £45 to smooth each one out. It adds up to over £84,000 in total. And as has been noted, that's a whole lot of cash. Let's have a look at one or two of your contributions. Just going back a couple of years, I'm quoting from Terry. If our government had the foresight when demolishing sites like the Villiers, Athol and Lido, just to name a few, if they'd tipped all the stone from these buildings over Marine Drive, instead of going to landfill, they could have opened Marine Drive for a very little cost. I'm not an infrastructural engineer, so I wouldn't be able to say whether that's accurate or not. What about Derby House, Hills House, etc.? When will something be done about these buildings? People are actually living there. And that's a query from Katie. And this is one, we passed a remark earlier, we were talking about the courtyard development, as the Callows Yard used to be, apparently, as courtyard now. Colin Leather, is there something wrong with benefit people that you don't want them to be in the courtyard? They're not a subcaste. Desperate times can hit anyone. We see it every day. You didn't mean it like that, did you?
No,
you
not
just
at
said,
all.
I asked you if there were going to be benefit people in there, and you said no, basically. Is what
not
you
at
said.
all. There's benefit people in all Castletown Commissioners, well, not some of Castletown Commissioners' houses. Nothing against benefit people whatsoever.
This, I presume, is for Castletown. Is the metal footbridges that span the harbour going to be replaced?
Yeah.
But this is the one at the upper the inner harbour.
It's the one that goes across from the castle towards the Nautical Museum.
It's made convenient, it's very easy to get to the town square, and has been missing for some time.
It has indeed.
Where is it? What have you done with it?
Well, it's not in my back garden, that's for sure. It's been refurbished. DOI are refurbishing it. It's nearly ready for coming back. It should have been back in position about 2 weeks ago, but they're putting a non-slip surface on it. So they had a problem with that, but I'm anticipating, I hope, it's going to be back before Easter.
And one thing that has gone, I know it's fairly graphic, but the description of Margaret Iney Quain's burnt in the square, which used to be on the back of the Smart Memorial, I think has disappeared. Is that being renovated, or has it gone for good?
I had hold of it literally about 4 days ago. It's in the Commissioner's workshops. It's going to be refurbished. I'm told that the writing on it is not exactly correct, so we'll
She wasn't burned.
No, I'm not saying that she was or she wasn't. I'm sorry, but I'm
I know
told,
what you mean. Yes,
yeah.
I am being mischievous.
yeah. I could be just as facetious, John. But I'm told that it's not worded correctly. Many people have asked for it. Where is it? When's it going back, etc. But yeah, it is in the Commissioner's workshop. It's wood, so that needs to be looked at. We'll probably have to make a new one and get it up there.
Jane Poole-Wilson, that was a particularly awful part of Manx history in 1617. This lady and her son were burnt at the stake for accused of being witches and etc. because they gave potions to farmers to help their crops grow. Should we be talking about things like that, or is it best that we sort of ameliorate and not have things like that?
Well, no, I mean, I think it's
part of our history.
I think it's very important. Yeah, I think if things that are part of our history, absolutely. I think I think it's a big mistake actually to try and sort of airbrush bits of our history out. In that, it's part of. We learn so much from history. So if we don't have that history available to us, and we can understand how people once behaved, why they behaved in that way, and why things have changed, I think it's very important actually.
The one thing that is incredible in that is that the Manx went off burning people after that, and it's the only people we ever did burn, whereas they continued doing it, I think, across the water in certain places in Scotland, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, also, although it's history for us, it unfortunately is a reality in certain countries around the world. When you get superstition coinciding with violence against women, we have seen in various countries absolutely atrocious things going on. So I think we need to learn from our history and recognise that actually at one time we were doing horrible things here, but we've developed and we've moved on from that, and I hope other countries can do the same.
This has come in with regards Ramsey. Although I'm not against the idea of a sports hall in Ramsey, I do not approve of the proposed site taking away more green areas. Surely they could bring Ramsey Courthouse into use for this scheme on the vacant and underused Laney Field, is it? L-H-E-I...
Litany Field.
Litany Field.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Obviously, the development or the proposed development of an indoor sports hall in Ramsey has got a lot of backing, but there have been people who've objected to which site it's going to be on. The Litany Field is very difficult in terms of access to it, and that's why that was ruled out. The courthouse, the roof isn't high enough to do indoor sports there. So what's been proposed and has now got planning permission is for the outline of a sports hall down near the Vollen, and that has to be done properly so that it fits in with the overall feel of the area and it doesn't take up too much of the green space. But we do have a lot of green space in that area already, particularly with the Morag Park, with the rugby ground. And so I hope that we can manage to balance these two things in terms of decent facilities for local people, but not taking away too much of the green space.
There's quite a bit of land, obviously, next to Ramsey, isn't there?
There is, and it's gradually being developed. If you go down the Ramsey prom today, you'll see a lot of work being done with an extension to the hotel there, which will add a function room, which the town badly needs. The DOI are doing a lot of work on the seawall, which was badly damaged by the severe storms we had recently. So that there's an awful lot of work going on. Also, if I can just thank the commissioners for providing changing facilities. They've put up these small huts in the Morag Park now for those children who want to use the water park during the summer, so they can get changed. They've listened to parents and have provided those facilities. And come the summer, if we carry on with this lovely sunshine, Ramsey's going to be the place to be.
Well, let's go to one of our callers now, Fenella, who's ringing in from Peel. Hello, Fenella. Sorry, I don't know how long you've been hanging on. I've been so engrossed with the conversation, I guess, that I didn't notice. Now, what are you talking about? The designing and developments is not practical sometimes.
Very often, it's not functional.
In Peel, you mean, you're talking about, or
No,
generally?
yes, but not just in Peel. It's quite often. I mean, I see pavements where you have to, where once upon a time a person in a wheelchair could get down them because the pavements were a lot lower. But now you have to go round like to get a dip. I mean, why can't they put a few more dips in them?
This is truly, Dr. Allinson.
I don't think an architect should be allowed to pick up a pencil until they've actually put somebody in a wheelchair and pushed them. Somebody slightly heavier than themselves, preferably. Not a lot, just enough to let them know they're pushing somebody. And then perhaps they would click that, that this equality bill needs to be equal to everybody. I mean, I'm not in a wheelchair. My husband is not in a wheelchair. But I just see people struggling in wheelchairs quite often, and I just think it's ridiculous.
Let me put that question. The Equality Bill, which I think is due to be fully implemented by 2020, is it? That surely has things to look after problems like this, doesn't it?
Well, it does. And part of it is decent planning. So, for instance, when we had the regeneration in Ramsey, around the courthouse area, this was taken into account. So the curbs are specially developed there to take wheelchairs across. But I think you're quite right, and Jane would know more about this as Equality Champion. When the Equality Bill comes in, you have to have access. There's no point saying, oh, you can come into our shop, you can come down our high street, but actually you can't because of the curbs or the way the doorways are constructed. And so government will be giving a lot of advice to people, both local authorities and private developers, to say this is the standard that you've got to get up to. I don't know what you say about that, Jane.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Certainly, any new schemes that are being designed absolutely should have the thought process, and it is about design. But interestingly, as well as physical disabilities, we also have to be aware of other types of disability and incorporating those into a design. So I absolutely take the point about wheelchair users. I think we also have to be alive to people with visual impairments and with other impairments. So at the point when we are designing schemes, roads, new areas, the design of the prom, for instance, is very, very important. And it was something that I wanted to talk to DOI officers on, is to make sure that they are taking advice from different people with different needs to try and make sure that the scheme overall is designed in such a way that it works for as many people as we can, no matter what their particular needs might be.
Colin, your square, was that designed to help people with handicaps, people disabled?
Yeah. I'm used to wheelchairs because we have a member of the family that is in a wheelchair. My mother was in a wheelchair, so I can see where people are coming from on that one. There's quite a lot of places that's difficult to get into with a wheelchair. The square has definitely been designed for wheelchair access, and even the footpaths.
Not for car access, difficult getting out of it, isn't it? If you park there.
Well, that's another story, John. But the footpaths in Castletown have all been designed for wheelchairs. And we had a meeting in the square with the National Institute of the Blind to discuss the needs for blind people. Following that, the Tetra paving was altered to a different colour to suit the blind people, partially blind people, because with the square being a grey colour, there was no contrast. Apparently, you've got to have a contrast, black and white, for partially blind people. So the DOI, they replaced that. So now that's okay.
Let me draw Fenella. Fenella, I hope you're still there. Yeah, obviously there is concern and knowledge of these problems. But is it being carried out, or is anything being done about it? Is what your problem?
And also, it's very important to have very even paving, because lots of people may trip on that when they become older. It's easy to trip on a paving stone that's proud. So, I think those things are all very important. But in my own circumstances, now we've just moved into Mulcreast Court, and it's lovely, beautiful design. The only thing is that the four darkest flats that have got the least light, because get the least sunlight, have only one window in the biggest room.
That's gone into another big subject.
Yes, it is. But, this is just architects generally. I think they should have more. They can make a lovely looking building from the outside, but I just think that they should be given a bit more. Right from the off, all these things should be pointed out to them, like the pavements, like the places to get down to your car if you're a bit doddery on the old feet, and or even if you're in a wheelchair.
That's a fair point, but we'll have to close it there because we've got quite a list. But Fenella, thank you very much indeed for your contribution. Let me just move on to our next contributor, Stephen. This is to do with the steam packet. Is it right to suggest the steam packet company, with hundreds of employees, pension receivers, could be ditched after serving the Isle of Man for over 100 years? And why does the Lake District get millions of visitors, and Ireland has had its best tourist years in the last few years? What are we doing wrong? Quite a few questions in here. Please do not mention the word bucket and spade in reply. Stephen actually joined us on the phone. Stephen, just quickly, a couple of questions there, isn't there?
Yeah, there is a couple of questions there, and I've got another one on a similar theme. If any of your panel care to make any contributions to these ones.
Well, can we deal with the two you've asked before we go on to the other one?
Yes, of course, crack on.
Yeah,
yes.
the steam packet. You're saying we shouldn't even think about ditching the steam packet because basically the effect that would have on the number of employees working for them and their pension rights and all that sort of thing.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that to dismiss all the employees and pension receivers of the steam packet company in what seems to me to be a bloody blasé fashion from the government seems to be incredibly short-sighted and incredibly dishonest and not the right thing to do. And I think that if you had a company which the steam packet certainly has done, has served the island for over 100 years, employing people and giving people opportunities to go to sea, which is not a thing that's happened. If we had a company that came along now and offered these services that the steam packet does, I'm sure it would be lauded, and there'd be headlined pages and there'd be news releases galore.
But do you think we should have a tender process where the whole operation is looked at from time to time rather than just continues?
Well, this does lead on to the next question, which I have rang in for, but it's on the similar theme, and that is we are putting the squeeze on the steam packet. Our elected government does appear to be putting the squeeze on the steam packet, and I presume there's going to be a change to the way the gas industry is regulated shortly, because I believe that the ability to change that, it comes in 2018. Now, however we may look at these companies, they have got a lot of investment in the infrastructure, and I'm sure at some point we would like to see a deal. But this does lead on to my other point, which I think is vitally important. Is the MUA, I'll use these terms, I know it's the MUA, which is the electricity supplier,
Manx Utilities,
and the Water Authority, are these organisations going to be regulated in a similar way, or are we prepared to say that because they're owned by the taxpayer, then they don't need regulation? And yet we all know that our energy, not just gas, but certainly electricity and water, is rising constantly.
Well, before you answer your own question, can I put that to the chairman of the MUA, Dr. Allinson, who's with me? There's the question.
No, very good question. Thanks very much for phoning in, Stephen. I mean, I think you're quite right that there are inherent problems with monopolies when you're on a small island. So you've mentioned the steam packet and Manx Gas, and both of them are tied into a user agreement with the Isle of Man government, which are both coming up for a renewal. And I think it's quite right to respect the history of the steam packet company, but make sure that they're delivering services to the people of this island at the right price and not making excessive profit. Manx Utilities is slightly different because it's owned by the taxpayer. It's a statutory board in a similar way to the Post Office, but we're directly answerable to Tynwald. And I'm chair of Manx Utilities. We've got a board meeting on Thursday. We have Treasury people coming into the meetings. We're very open and honest with what we do in terms of government, and we try to make sure that we not only repay quite a substantial debt that was incurred when the new power station was built, but also that we keep prices as reasonable as possible. And if I have to put up prices on behalf of the board, I have to come to Tynwald and get that approved. So there is a large amount of democratic accountability there. But you're right that there needs to be quite close regulation and transparency with pricing across the board, whether that's a ferry trip, a gas bill or a water bill.
Quick comment, Stephen, because we're going to have to move on.
The comment is that I know that Dr. Allison qualified it by his last few words, where it seemed like he was saying that profit is a dirty word, and I'm afraid it isn't. We still live in a capitalist world, and there's profits got to be made. But I do think that we can't accept that just because the MUA is owned by government, then that in itself is not regulated. Now, I hear what he says about the past, but quite frankly, that's nothing to do with the consumer. And it's really a little bit like saying, well, the steam packet company has been taken over, and these owners who've come along and took it over, they are looking for that return. Now, that's not really any different to the argument that you're using, that we've got to charge this money because we've got these huge debts.
We'll have to move it on, because Colin Leather would like to answer that, Stephen.
I don't want to answer it, Stephen. I want to make a comment. And the comment is, we say that this is a wonderful island. It is, until you come and pay your electric or your gas bill. And who would have thought in this day and age we would have people living in fuel poverty on this island because of the price they're paying for energy in their homes? It's not right.
Stephen, thank you very much for your question. Another question that's come in via text. Why are Castletown houses going or got gas in and town hall when Castletown tenants cannot afford to put gas on and in for about 5 years. The houses will get damp, and local authority houses are for the needy, as you say. I've just read it as it's come up, but I hope you can understand that question, Mr. Leather.
Sort of.
It's to do with gas in, I think, the houses that you operate.
The town hall at the moment is having a new gas central heating system fitted. The old system was not fit for purpose. It had come to the end of its life. Now the houses in Farrants Park are going to be converted into gas, and they're also going to be converted into gas when, well, not converted, but they're going to have gas installed in the new houses when they're refurbished in School Hill. The refurbishment in Janet's Corner houses, the new houses down there, they have gas as well. So the move to gas is actually cheaper than supplying oil, and it doesn't require planning permission, whereas if you had oil, you'd need a planning permission for an oil tank, etc., etc.
Can I just move to Jane Poole-Wilson? You were listening obviously intently to Stephen Moore's comments about the MUA. Do you agree with what he says? Or, obviously, Dr. Allinson basically was arguing for the MUA.
I mean, I do think he makes a good point that any one of these industries has to be successful, i.e., make enough money to be able to invest in its infrastructure. I mean, if we think about the steam packet, even the cost of replacing new or getting new boats is substantial. So if you're not able to make enough profit in order to invest in the future, then you can't carry on running your business for the benefit of the Isle of Man. But it is a difficult one. On a small island, our monopoly system, it is not easy. And I think there is a balance to be struck between making sure that any one of these industries actually is able to function and run itself well for the benefit of the Isle of Man, but at the same time, that we're mindful that they are regulated appropriately.
Just go on to a couple more things before we go to the next break. Most people understand a former police station easier than a castle, quicker for visitors, and maybe cheaper admission equals plenty of visitors. That comes from one of our listeners. This is to do with potholes. £84,000 wasted on temporary repairs to potholes. I must say that the repairs to potholes doesn't seem to last very long, but then again, if you're just slapping some tarmac in there, I suppose it won't last very long.
Well, I think it's a genuine problem, and Ray Harmer, when he's spoken in Tynwald, has explained that a lot of the roads on the Isle of Man were just laying tarmac over dirt roads. They didn't have the right foundations for them, and so yes, you are playing catch up, but people are worried about potholes. They're dangerous. They're wrecking people's suspension. And I must say, I've used the pothole hotline as it is online, and it's remarkable how quickly they come and fix them. But you're quite right that sometimes the potholes are there because of underlying problems, and you need a big project to come in and do the whole road up.
I did mention the other day when we were talking to Ray Harmer, at the beginning of it, I went out and interviewed a pothole, as I put it. This was off the Cool Road, and within 24 hours it had been filled in, I'm glad to say. Let's take a break.
Manx Radio.
The programme is the Mannin line. It's off the back of present politics, and my guest in the studio, Colin Leather, Chairman of Castletown Commissioners, Jane Poole-Wilson, MLC, and Dr. Allinson, Chairman of the MUA, as we've heard, but also the man behind a private member's bill looking at changes to the abortion rights. This, of course, was subject to what's called a committee in the House of Keys, which means instead of rigorously following a rote, which means that you could only speak on a motion once, etc. Anybody can get up and question all sorts of people, so it's like that. But after about 2.5 hours of that, basically it was decided they hadn't got far enough, and we'll come back in another week to do that. But let me just touch upon something else, and this is about the protests that have taken place about it and safe zones. There seems to be a lot of debate about this. I suppose the practical way of actually having safe zones around people who are engaged in that, engaged in health, engaged in basically just protecting people who might be carrying out that sort of work. Home Affairs Minister Bill Malarkey, who's been speaking very strongly on this subject, says there's been criticism that pictures used by a group, Abort 67, are too graphic to be seen in public.
Obviously, after the demonstrations and the complaints that we had to look at it seriously as to just what's the definition of a graphic image, and everybody has a different opinion of it.
Well, there must be somewhere in the world an image which is adhered to by law, is there not?
Well, I've asked my department to go back and have a look at this and look at legislation generally to see what needs tightening up.
Dr. Allinson, the more that the abortion debate clauses have been debated in some regards, the harder it's apparent it is to get something that's applicable to everyone. Everyone agrees with, doesn't it?
I disagree with that. We are getting there. What happened with the Committee of the House was we spent hours talking about this very issue. What some people see as graphic and objectionable, other people see as their democratic right to protest, and how you manage to balance those. What happened was that Ralph Peake brought an amendment which allowed access zones to be established, which stopped people demonstrating, and this is an inherent problem in the United Kingdom and in the United States, whereby demonstrators are actually harassing women accessing abortion services or other healthcare services. And I didn't think it was going to be a problem here, but unfortunately, as this debate has gone on in terms of changing our abortion law, we have had people coming from across who have very different opinions to people living on the island and will demonstrate very, very aggressively. What we will do on Tuesday is come back to the House after having this great debate, this amazing amount of scrutiny, come back to the House with an amended bill, and I hope we can now get agreement on that. We're almost there in terms of quite a fundamental change to the way the Isle of Man provides services, healthcare services for women on this island, and I hope that over the next few weeks we can show that we are making real progress and have actually brought a lot of people together rather than separate them. I think there's an awful lot of consensus now that this is the right way to go forward.
Jane Poole-Wilson, one of the problems here, of course, if you produce a list of people who are involved to protect them, you could turn them into targets.
Yes, and I think, that was part of the discussion that happened in the House of Keys.
Because it's yet to go to LegCo, of course, this whole thing, hasn't it?
It is, and I think on just the safe zones or the access zones, I think what you want to achieve, which is, as Dr. Allinson says, is to allow women who are accessing abortion services to be able to do that free from harassment. So you want to make sure that the way in which the law is ultimately written allows for that, but does not create, it's the law of unintended consequences, which, as you say, is you don't also want people to become targets because they are then known about. So it's finding the right formulation to achieve what you want without the unintended consequences.
When this goes...
Yeah, because one of the things that came up with the debate was people thought that if you establish access zones, you've got to tell people where they can't demonstrate. What the new amendment will say is they can demonstrate, but if they're warned by a police officer that actually that's an access zone, they have to move. And what will be published will be not the address of the person, but the zone itself. So you'll be told, for instance, you couldn't demonstrate outside the hospital and 100 metres from that. If the demonstrators then start targeting GP surgeries or individuals' houses, then they'll be told, well, you can't demonstrate in this area, but they won't be told the actual address of the person involved. And
it could be very difficult.
Important.
The police are going to have to be all over the place, aren't they? I mean, the demonstrators could move from one zone to another, to another, to another.
Well, hopefully not. I mean, it's the same thing. We have this policy of, ring before you dig, that you shouldn't start digging holes in the ground until you know what pipework is there. Surely, if you're going to be an organised demonstration, you should ask the police beforehand where you can and can't demonstrate. I mean, that makes common sense to me, and actually is good manners.
Just move to a subject I touched on earlier in this programme, Dr. Allinson. Dr. Allinson mentioned that Aborigines suffer from diabetes and obesity. Does he know that before the West brought in fast food, sweets, ice cream and pork, they were in good health and didn't suffer from any of these Western diseases? Does he know that, he obviously does, that pigs contain a worm called trichinosis that is contained within pork that causes many illnesses that doctors often mistake for other illnesses?
Yes, I mean, thankfully we don't see a huge amount of either food poisoning or other diseases caused by foodstuffs on the Isle of Man, just because we have very, very good farmers here who look after their cattle, look after their pigs, look after their produce. But it is a problem, and I know if you talk to public health, they keep a very close eye on cases of food poisoning here and would encourage people, obviously, to cook pork right the way through.
I'm going to have to take another break because we're crowded with breaks, but we will be back and then talking about Brexit, which is something that's come up during the week because the committee has been talking to the Chief Minister about what the Isle of Man is doing to prepare itself for Brexit. But first, this. Our guests on the studio, Colin Leather of Castletown Commissioners, the Chairman of Castletown Commissioners, Jane Poole-Wilson of LegCo, who I'll be talking to in a moment about an aspect of her work, and also Dr. Alex Allinson. We just mentioned there about LegCo looking at the abortion bill. You were telling me during the break, you don't have to go into committee.
No, and
why is that?
Well, Legislative Council isn't constrained in the same way that the House of Keys is. So we tend to operate as committee. Generally, when we're looking at legislation, we are free to speak more than once, and indeed that's quite normal for Legislative Council. So our setup allows for exactly what the Keys have been doing, but as a result of their mechanism now to go into committee of the whole House.
So will you want the legal draftsman there to answer questions?
Well, we may well do. I mean, the other thing that Legislative Council does a lot is actually have officers, legislative draftspeople, come to speak and inform our deliberations. That's quite normal. And I imagine that when we come to consider the abortion bill, if there are any aspects where we want to get some clarity around how particular provisions work, then yes, we would welcome the legislative draftsman being there.
Call them draftspersons, I suppose we've got to call.
Draftspersons, yes.
Draftspersons. Just moving on to a committee that you're chair of, which was talking to members, high-ranking members of the government, in particular the Chief Minister. Well, not that he had two officers with him as well. Can I just give this question that's come in? The EU Parliament are now going to look into the Crown dependencies. What are the panel's views on this, especially with the Chief Minister, who clearly doesn't understand the risks to the island set by the EU agenda after a question he answered to Keys? Now, you obviously were able to quiz him with your committee. Chris Robertshaw was on your committee as well, and Laurie Hooper as well, about what the government is doing towards Brexit. As chairman, were you happy with what the government is doing?
I think we had an interesting opportunity through the hearing that we had earlier this week, both to try and get some more information out into the public domain. So, I think it was very useful. I hope that the Chief Minister and the officers concerned, as well as the wider public, found that useful to be able to hear more about what the government is doing. And yes, the other important aspect of what we were doing was being able to ask some questions, so to conduct some scrutiny, to try and understand a little bit more about what the Isle of Man's position is on various things. And it is true to say, we are, because of our relationship with the United Kingdom, we are not able to go and represent ourselves. We are reliant on the United Kingdom representing our interests. But I suppose what is very important for us on the island is to try and understand, what's our best case scenario for the island coming out of Brexit, where we have potential conflicts between perhaps what the UK would ideally achieve and what would be in the Isle of Man's interests. What are the mechanisms to resolve that? And Della Fletcher spoke. It was
the
very
Director of
interesting.
External Relations.
That's right. She spoke about the fact that this is not something new for the Isle of Man. There have been other occasions historically where the United Kingdom has had to go into bat, if you like, for the Isle of Man.
Not really supporting what we're doing.
Yes, exactly, but having to represent our interests. So to some extent, I suppose it's reassuring to hear that, this isn't something new for the Isle of Man in terms of how it has to sort of set out its stall to the United Kingdom and then persuade them to go into bat on our behalf. Colin
Leather, Chairman of Castletown Commissioners, should we be actually paying very close attention as a nation to this, or is it something that's just in the process at the moment and we can just let it go by and sooner or later we'll find out what's happening?
Certainly can't let it go by, that's for sure, because all done behind closed doors, as it were, in Brussels. I think we should definitely have a plan for Plan A and Plan B. Hard Brexit, soft Brexit, etc., etc.
Should we have a wish list of what we would like the Manx position to be at the end of the day?
I think certainly we should know where we are with a wish list. Certainly all the services that we provide here must be protected, and I suppose you're talking a City of London situation there. But it's difficult when these people go across to Brussels, negotiate on the UK's behalf, with us tagging on a little bit at the end. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it. But the real sad thing is that we as a nation, as people, we have no say in whatsoever in what's happening with Brexit, and I think that's wrong.
That is a fear of a lot of people, Dr. Allinson. Will the UK, if they're told by Europe, we don't like what the Crown dependencies are doing, we will give you this if you clamp down on the Crown dependencies?
I think that's an understandable fear. What I would say, though, is that the Chief Minister, Hal Quayle, and Alf Cannon have been extremely visible around Westminster to make sure that the Isle of Man is not overlooked, to make sure that the Crown dependencies, but particularly us, are at the forefront of decisions made, so that when these, if something like that was to come up, they would recognise the conflicts of interest and hopefully would do their job, which is to represent the Isle of Man.
Just moving on to other subjects, we don't have a national park. This is after Stephen Moore's call. We allow trail bikes on our hills and dump rubbish over Marine Drive. Now, Bill Dale, our beach buddies, has suggested we put cameras at the end of Marine Drive, so at least we know if rubbish is dumped, who went down there, and that could discourage people from actually going and dumping fridges and things. Is that a good idea, Jane Poole-Wilson?
I think Bill Dale does tremendous work, and I think he's got a campaign going now, is my understanding, to try and raise funds for it. I mean, personally, I feel it's a real shame that it should have to come to something like this, where we have to sort of use that kind of monitoring, if you like, CCTV, in order to try and deter people from dumping rubbish. As a child of the 1970s, I do remember the Keep Britain Tidy campaigns, and I remember a lot of work was done to try and instill, I think, in society the importance of keeping things tidy, disposing of things responsibly. And somewhere along the way, we sort of lost that, and I think it's coming back. I think it's been talked a lot about the success of Blue Planet in raising awareness again of the impact of when we dump rubbish irresponsibly, the impact, the negative impact, not only for the beauty spots of our island, but more seriously as well for the wider ocean.
Oh, Dr. Allinson, as a doctor, I mean, this glass of water apparently contains plastic.
Well, it's in a plastic.
It's in a plastic cup.
A single-use plastic cup, which you should be ashamed of yourself. I've got a glass one here, which will last 100 years.
Well, I shall use this many times. But
yeah, I mean, you've got lots of pollution problems, but I think we also, as an island, have to send out a really clear signal that fly tipping is just not acceptable. The people who dump rubbish, knowing that they're breaking the law, should be prosecuted if you can catch them. As a local authority, when I was one of the Ramsey commissioners, we did find somebody who dumped, I think it was a microwave, and they'd done it in the original box with their address on it, which was stupid. But we prosecuted them for it. I mean, it is just unacceptable. There's so many places to get rid of rubbish lawfully on this island. To flagrantly just destroy the environment for everyone else is just not acceptable, and I think these people should be prosecuted.
I'm going to have to take one more break, I'm afraid. There is one subject I want to touch upon with Jane Poole-Wilson in just a moment. But first, this break.
The Nation Station, Manx Radio.
Yes, we have whipped through the programme very quickly, but a subject I want to cover is the whistleblowers. A new committee has been appointed to investigate the government's policy on whistleblowing. The Onken MHK Julie Edge will chair it, but Jane Poole-Wilson will be on it. It's something what's missing on the island? It should be brought in, do you think?
It's not that it's missing.
Sorry, I'm asking your opinion on something which you've been set up to look into, but please.
No, it's not that it's missing. I mean, we do have in our Employment Rights Act 2006, we do have our whistleblowing protections, which are basically aimed at workers so that if they have any concerns around particular areas, very serious areas, things like criminal offence and so on, they do feel able to raise those concerns without fear that they will lose their job or suffer some other detriment. So we do have that law. I think the question is, when it comes to actually encouraging people in practice to feel able to raise issues of concern, know that they will be looked into, know that the individual raising the concern will not suffer as a consequence of raising the issue.
It'd be very difficult for someone to go and working somewhere if they have whistleblown.
It's incredibly difficult on a small community. I mean, Claire Betterson made the point that it's great living on an island, but the truth of it is, if you raise a serious issue here, that can be very, very difficult for you in a small community. So the committee is interested in looking at the government's policy and the underpinning legislation. Really, I think to see that it's working as well as it can, because it's all very well having a policy, but if in fact people do not feel able to raise things with confidence, then we ought to be looking at, well, what are the sort of mechanisms that ought to go around that policy to make it possible for people to raise serious concerns.
Yeah, just quickly before we get to the end of the programme, a couple of other subjects. When will a ban be introduced on all issue of plastic bags? It's coming in gradually, I think, in the Isle of Man. Certain stores still give out plastic bags, but I think they are stopping it. This is for Dr. Allinson. I recently was in the company of workers come to the Isle to work at the power station for a local contractor. They said they can charge and get what they want as there is no tendering process at the power station, and the local contractor has an open checkbook to carry out work. Is that true?
No, it's not true. We have a very tight tendering process for all work on the power station and throughout Manx Utilities, but those companies have to be properly regulated and have all the right health and safety conditions met. But yes, there is a complete tendering process for all work.
And a final comment for this programme. Castletown Square, with one of the finest backdrops in the UK, should never have been made into a car park again. Disgrace. One word comment on that, Colin?
Well,
Keep it clean. Very quickly.
I couldn't agree with him more. We had an online survey. 71% of the people said that they want the square as an open public space. I'm with them.
That's the programme for today. Thanks for your contribution. It's news time.